In recent years, the phenomenon of climate change has garnered widespread attention. It is widely acknowledged that human activities, particularly the burning of fossil fuels and deforestation, have significantly contributed to this global issue. Scientists around the world are urgently researching sustainable solutions to mitigate the effects of climate change. Among these, renewable energy sources such as solar and wind power are increasingly being viewed as vital components of a more sustainable future. However, transitioning to these cleaner energy sources requires substantial investment and international cooperation. The Industrial Revolution, which began in the late 18th century, marked a significant breakthrough in human history. It brought about a rapid revolution in technological advancements, leading to the mechanization of various industries. This period witnessed the emergence of steam engines, textile mills, and the growth of urban centers. As a result, there was a substantial expansion in the demand for labor, particularly in factories. Workers faced harsh working conditions, long hours, and low wages, which eventually contributed to labor movements and the fight for workers' rights. Some years ago, Bjorn Lomborg, a young Danish statistician, published a book called The Skeptical Environmentalist. It became a bestseller and generated a lot of heat. Lomborg was attacked, abused, and accused of all manner of things, not because he denied the fact of global warming, in fact he affirmed it, but because, on his analysis, the devil and, he says, a lot of deviousness was contained in the details presented concerning the size of the problem and what were the most responsible steps to take in response to global warming. Two decades ago, Kashmiri houseboat owners rubbed their hands every spring at the prospect of the annual influx of tourists. From May to October, the hyacinth-choked waters of Dal Lake saw flotillas of vividly painted shikaras carrying Indian families, boho Westerners, young travelers, and wide-eyed Japanese. Carpet sellers honed their skills, as did purveyors of anything remotely embroidered, while the houseboats initiated by the British Raj provided unusual accommodation. Any foreigners venturing there risked their lives, proved in 1995 when 5 young Europeans were kidnapped and murdered. So between 4000 and 3000 BC, the Mesopotamian Sumerian cultures do not practice any kind of burial. And then, about 3000, in the early dynastic period, these burials start to reappear, and they reappear with a certain amount of conspicuous consumption, and this is the context for the royal burials at UR. Okay, so, the royal cemetery consists of quite a number of pits, so these are the excavation workers who are coming down into the pits. So you get some sense of how really deep and how really difficult it was to construct these chambers. Green chemistry is a concept designed to develop technologies which allow chemistry to be practiced with minimal damage to the environment, or in an environmentally compatible way, and it's meant to cover both chemical processes and chemical products. The center was set up about 7 or 8 years ago. And the idea was to provide a hub of activities that covered fundamental research work, international collaboration, but also educational development on public understanding of the project as well, and also networking, so we network out to well over 1,000 people around the globe. In this tutorial, we will show you how to find specific journal articles using the library catalog. The university subscribes to over 18,000 journals across a variety of subjects, most of which are available electronically. To find a specific journal article using a library catalog, we need to search by the journal name, as individual article titles are not listed in the catalog. Also, malaria is something that is a very complex disease with this complex life cycle. That means that if you're going to eliminate it, you have to be able to target cute parasites and humans. You have to be able to target parasites in the mosquitoes, that mosquito population. And so that requires a lot of resources. It requires really good planning and a health system across all these different levels. And so I think the political capital that you need for that, the educational infrastructure you need for that, the economic resources you need for that are quite a challenge. I'm going to argue that the tremendous increases in productivity that we associate with the Industrial Revolution originate not so much from changes in science or technology or new inventions, where England was far from unique, as from changes in attitudes towards morality, towards what constituted the good. Attitudes towards property, which became in England individuals long before it did on the continent. Attitudes toward the proper role of government. And together, these attitudes constitute much of what the Luddites were protesting against. Perhaps you remember the dire predictions from the analysts. The fall-off in housing threatened to drag down the entire economy. High energy prices put the kibosh on consumer spending. Runaway inflation was poised to take off. David Weiss is an economist at Standard & Poor's. He says in the end, none of those things happened in the final 3 months of last year. My hero is Marie Curie. She was a Polish physicist and chemist working in France, and she did conduct pioneering research on radioactivity. She was also the first woman who won a Nobel Prize. Marie Curie is my hero because she showed a lot of determination in following her career path and her passions. She also showed a lot of patience in working for years to receive results from her experiments. And Marie Curie, she designed and built the first mobile X-ray machines. She worked on the front lines of the First World War along with her daughter, saving soldiers. Adidas teamed up with an organization called Parley for the oceans. Parley goes out and collects plastic waste from the ocean. Adidas uses the plastic waste to make shoes. Shoes made with plastic from the ocean, good for the environment and good for business. Because if you know that rapidly growing consumer segment known as hipsters, and I know you know hipsters, then you know that a hipster faced with the choice between a no-name shoe and an Adidas made with plastic from the ocean will pick the Adidas every day of the week and twice on Sunday, and then walk around like it's no big deal, but look for every opportunity to talk about them. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My theme for this session is Convergence, Technology Change and Business Practice. This is somewhat dear to my heart, in that I have spent much of the last 15 years involved in various aspects of technology and their impact on business, across a broad spectrum, from applications of signal processing in manufacture right through to the use of utilization data and diary applications, to improve the time utilization of the sales force. Lead-in time is the amount of time that elapses between a business placing an order with a supplier for more stock or raw materials and the delivery of the goods to the business. Businesses want the lead time to be as short as possible, so that they can meet their customer orders and minimize the time between paying for the stock and receiving the feedback from the customer. However, this may not happen due to a number of factors, such as delays in the supplier receiving the order, or the breakdown of the supplier's lorries delivering the stock to the business. We've decided to adopt, just as a loose theme for the course, a biological theme so that you can see the connections between chemistry and biology and the things you might consider doing in the future. We want you to think about the molecules that are relevant to your body, the processes that occur in your body, the chemistry that's going on, and how energy plays a role. And we've divided the course into 4 sections, and after each section there will be a midterm. The first one is about matter. Colombian military and police have confirmed that they have captured Dairo Antonio Usuga, known as Odenil, Colombia's most sought-after drug trafficker and leader of the Clan del Golfo. He was captured on Saturday during an operation carried out by the country's armed forces. Colombia had offered a reward of about $800,000 for information concerning his whereabouts. Italy's right-wing former Interior Minister, Matteo Salvini, went on trial Saturday on charges of kidnapping for refusing in 2019 to allow a Spanish migrant rescue ship to dock in Sicily, keeping the people on board at sea for days. Life in the UK 2012 provides a unique overview of well-being in the UK today. The report is the first snapshot of life in the UK to be delivered by the Measuring National Wellbeing Programme and will be updated and published annually. Well-being is discussed in terms of the economy, people, and the environment. Information such as the unemployment rate or number of crimes against the person are presented alongside data on people's thoughts and feelings, for example, satisfaction with our jobs or leisure time and fear of crime. Together, a richer picture on how society is doing is provided. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released the first part of its latest assessment report. The Earth is warming. Even with a drastic reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, temperatures will probably be 1.5 degrees Celsius above their late 19th century levels by 2050. Climate change is underway, the report laments, with all the environmental consequences that brings. The extent of the damage depends on the cumulative buildup of emissions, and can be limited if the world strives for net zero carbon emissions. On August 4, explosives aboard two drones flying near Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro as he spoke in Caracas were detonated. 7 people were injured. Maduro has used the incident as a pretext to crack down on Venezuela's opposition by unleashing the regime's secret police. State Department spokesperson Heather Nauert said, "The United States condemns the political violence that occurred on August 4 and urges the Maduro regime to respect the rule of law, exercise restraint, and safeguard the presumption of innocence for all accused." Even if the distribution of women's occupations matched that of men, if women were the doctors and men were the nurses, she calculates that at most a third of the pay gap would disappear. The most important cause is that women curtail their careers as a part of a rational household response to labor markets, which generously reward anyone, male or female, who is willing to hold down what Ms. Golden calls a greedy job. These are roles, such as those in law, accountancy, and finance, that demand long and unpredictable hours. Parents need somebody to be on call at home in case a child falls ill and needs picking up from school, or needs cheering on at a concert or football match. President Trump has warned Turkey's President Erdogan that foreign interference is complicating the situation in Libya. It comes after Turkey MPs approved a bill, allowing the military to be deployed to interfere in Libya's civil war in support of the UN-backed government in Tripoli. The United States is to ban a number of popular e-cigarette flavors to curb the rising use of vaping products among teenagers. However, menthol and tobacco flavors will be allowed to remain on the market, and large refillable vaping devices are completely exempt from the ban. Executive Vice President of the U.S. government's Overseas Private Investment Corporation, OPIC, David Bohidjian, and other U.S. government officials traveled to Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia in August to promote U.S. investment in those countries. OPIC is the U.S. government's development finance institution. It mobilizes private capital to help address critical development challenges and, in doing so, advances U.S. foreign policy and national security priorities. On August 14, the U.S. delegation met with Armenian Minister of Economic Development and Investments Artsvik Manasian. The authorities in the Spanish city of Barcelona say 13 people have been killed and 80 injured by a van, which deliberately drove into them at a popular tourist market. The vehicle moved at speed through Las Ramblas in the city center, before being abandoned by the driver, who ran away. Hundreds of tourists and local people took shelter in shops and churches, as police searched for suspects. Hours later, 2 of them, including a man of Moroccan origin, were arrested. Spanish media say another suspect was killed in a police shootout on the outskirts of the city. The Spanish Prime Minister, Mariano Rajoy, who is on his way to Barcelona, says he will be coordinating efforts to reinforce security, while the Catalan president, Carles Puigdemont, has called for solidarity. The government of the Spanish region of Catalonia has contradicted an assertion that the central authorities of Madrid that the jihadist soul behind 2 attacks in Catalonia had been dismantled. The interior minister in Catalan regional government Joaquim Forn said Catalan police were heading the inquiry and detectives were still searching for at least one suspect. At Turkey's request, the Spanish authorities have arrested the German-Turkish writer Doğan Akanlı. Mr. Akanlı, who has written extensively in Turkey's human rights record, is a critic of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The US and South Korea announced late Saturday the 2 countries will end annual large-scale joint military exercises as part of diplomatic efforts to achieve complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. In a statement, the Pentagon said Acting Secretary of Defense Patrick Shanahan and South Korea Minister of National Defense in a phone call Saturday decided to end the Key Resolve and Full Eagle series of exercises. The decision comes 3 days after a summit between U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in Vietnam that ended without an agreement to resolve the North Korean nuclear crisis. Seoul's defense ministry released a similar statement, according to the Associated Press. Heavy rains are expected to fall in a few weeks. 8 agencies are racing to shore up flimsy shelters and stabilize shaky terrain before the monsoon season begins. The UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, says the work ahead is monumental, but preparations are off to a better start this year than last. 8 agencies last year had to deal with the massive influx of more than 740,000 Rohingya refugees fleeing violence and persecution in Myanmar. They arrived over a period of a few months, straining local resources and requiring vast amounts of humanitarian assistance. The World Health Organization says 12 years ago, India alone was responsible for almost 70% of all polio cases around the world. It calls India's success against polio one of the most significant achievements in public health. WHO officials say India's accomplishment proved the crippling disease can be eliminated in even the most challenging circumstances with a strong political commitment. The number of polio cases has decreased from an estimated 350,000 a year to 33, since the WHO launched its global eradication campaign in 1988. A waterproof drone is being used by Australian scientists to collect the highly treasured nasal mucus of migrating whales. The snot is rich with fresh DNA, viruses, and bacteria, and is collected by a drone that hovers over the blowholes of humpback whales as they embark on their epic annual journey along Australia's east coast. From Sydney, Phil Mercer reports, whales, like all mammals, need air, and come to the surface to breathe through a blowhole. Vanessa Parada, a marine biologist at Macquarie University, says that nasal mucus indicates the health of the whale. Millions of people in North Korea are short of food, perpetually hungry children and pregnant and nursing mothers are suffering the most. The World Food Programme reports, South Korea's landmark donation, the biggest in more than a decade, will help ease the nutritional crisis faced by 2 million of this particularly vulnerable group of people. Under an agreement worked out by WFP between both countries, South Korea will donate 50,000 metric tons of rice and $4.5 million in cash for food needs in North Korea. Touchdown confirmed. We are safe on Mars. The control room at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory late in the evening of August 5, Pacific Time, when word arrived that the Curiosity rover had landed safely on Mars. The 1-ton rover, which dwarfs all Mars landers that came before it, will now spend a planned 2 years exploring the Martian surface. The mission is expected to cost $2.5 billion. Curiosity's task is to investigate the inside of Gale Crater, where a giant mound of sedimentary deposits may provide evidence of a wetter, possibly habitable Mars billions of years ago. But first it had to survive an elaborate landing sequence which appears to have gone smoothly. Curiosity landed on time and on target and soon beamed back grainy photos of its wheels and its shadow. Given the car-like size of the rover and the challenges of landing on Mars, Curiosity's landing goes down as one of the greatest parking jobs in history. All around the world, significant parts of our cultural heritage are threatened by pollution, neglect, carelessness, and greed. In learning the importance of our history, we come to understand the need to protect significant remains from the past so that future generations can come to understand their heritage. Dogs are not just man's best friend. Previous studies have shown that kids with dogs are less likely to develop asthma. Now a new study may show how, if results from mice apply to us. The work was presented at a meeting of the American Society for Microbiology. The study tests what's called the hygiene hypothesis. The idea is that extreme cleanliness may actually promote disease later on. Researchers collected dust from homes that had a dog. They fed that house dust to mice. They then infected the mice with a common childhood infection called respiratory syncytial virus, or RSV. The word hormone is derived from a Greek verb that means to excite. Hormones are found in all multicellular organisms and function to coordinate the parts of the organism. A hormone is a chemical signal. It is produced by one part of the body and is then transported to other parts of the body where it triggers responses in cells and tissues. The concept of chemical messengers in plants first emerged from a series of classic experiments on how plant stands respond to light. Think about this: a houseplant on the windowsill grows toward light. If you rotate the plant, it will soon reorient its growth until its leaves again face the window. The growth of a plant toward light is called phototropism. In a forest or other natural ecosystem where plants may be crowded, The New South Wales government has apologised for yesterday's transport chaos in and around Sydney Harbour during the visit of the Queen Mary II and the Queen Elizabeth II. Roads were lammed, traffic ground to a halt while tram and ferry services were swamped with thousands of additional passengers, with most services delayed for hours. Premier Maurice Humer says that plans were put in place to deal with the congestion but the number of visitors well exceeded expectations. On the harbour itself, there seemed to be as much congestion as there was on the roads, but everyone agreed it was an amazing spectacle. Millions of roses get handed out on Valentine's Day. But growing roses has an environmental impact worse than many other crops. Start with climate change. Most roses in the US and Europe are imported from warmer climes. All that flying and trucking adds thousands of metric tons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. Then there's all the water needed to, well, water the flowers. And the runoff fouled by copious quantities of pesticides needed to make the roses look perfect. There are also the wildlife and workers poisoned by all that fumigation. Add to that habitat destruction where floral plantations displace native forest and wetlands. Finally, there's the refrigeration needed to keep those blooms fresh. Signs that secure borrowing remains robust and firm data on manufacturing and retail sales, released on Thursday, painted the picture of an economy that has yet to be cooled by the recent state's spate of interest rate rises. Dave Hackenberg, a beekeeper since 1962, can usually tell what killed his bees just by looking at them. If they're lying on the ground in front of a hive, it's probably pesticides, he says. If the bees are deformed and wingless, it's probably vampire mites. But last fall, Hackenberg saw something he had never seen before. Thousands of his bee colonies simply disappeared. He was in Florida at the time, pulling the lids off some of his commercial hives. To his horror, they were all empty. Obviously, this is all relevant to your final assignment. So we're going to talk about it. So until today, we've gone through face-to-face interviews as the main sort of part of interviewing the window. Today we're going to have a look at going to use an email and why they work, why they don't necessarily work, and what are the challenges and some of the things that we need to be understanding, when we are completing such interpreters. So let's start with the foreign one. Obviously, there are a few benefits to them, and they are listed there up on that slide. It's obviously less stressful for those of you who might be a little bit anxious about interviewing. It is about 100 years since that great Canadian-born physician Sir William Osler, Regius Professor of Medicine in Oxford, complained about the increasing influence of the pharmaceutical industry on the medical profession. He would be turning in his grave at the way the industry now dominates doctors' prescribing habits. It does this not only by direct and indirect pressure on the doctors themselves, but also by encouraging the public to ask for scripts. Well, I'm absolutely delighted first of all to have been appointed to this professorship. The role is going to be about public engagement in science. It is about marketing science accessible to as wide an audience as possible. It's about making it easier for our academics here at the University of Birmingham to talk about their research to the general public, and it's not just about a one-way flow of information, it very much is about dialogue.